Adam Taxin with Daniel Greenfield, Sultan Kanish, talking about his Friday afternoon Roundup, which has the subtitle Control, Control, Control. This is the one for today, Friday, August 10th, 2012. Daniel, welcome. Let's start down under, because taking a break from the war on terror, you talk about a really weird Elizabeth Warren type situation going on in Australia. I don't know if we've ever had a situation quite like this even in the U.S. Can you fill us in a little bit about it?
Well, we have some of our fake Indians, but they're not really that prominent and not that big of an issue. But because here the issue are usually different types of minorities, specifically African Americans. But in Australia, Aborigines basically combine both. They're the huge issue for the left, and you've got this sizable amount of white Aborigines, which are basically people who claim to be Aborigines, who might have maybe 1/32 or 1/16 or something, but often maybe don't even have that, who are basically indistinguishable from white people, but and who receive obviously their version of affirmative action for it, but it's very dangerous to point out that these people don't actually happen to be Aborigines.
It's it's very interesting. It's almost as if, to me, if Elizabeth Warren and her supporters got really aggressive with Native Americans who said, wait a second, you're not Native American, but that, of course, hasn't happened yet, as bad as what Elizabeth Warren has done is. What's the role of Amnesty International in all of this?
Well, Amnesty International is the outpost of the left over there, and one of the things they're doing is pushing for autonomy for Aborigines, and some of their leaders who are pushing forward, who are ignoring the actual problems there and the domestic abuse, are going to be Aborigines, but again, they're kind of white looking. So an actual Aboriginal woman named Bess Price pointed that out, and now she's facing possible legal action for it. And
you should probably add, or I should add, that they're harassing someone who's trying to really make a difference in terms of the big problem Aboriginal females are having in terms of being raped. It's as if Amnesty International is getting in their way. That's a fair assessment, right?
Yeah, Aboriginal women have been mistreated for quite a long time. That's one of the politically incorrect facts that the narrative over there doesn't really allow through, but they were being mistreated all along. The culture there is rather bad. Young girls are often married out. I mean, we're talking 8, 9-year-olds are married out to much older men. That's Afghanistan-type stuff.
All right, let's go from Australia to Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, and he was in the news a little bit lately. It seems like the left now has a new gun control advocate.
Yeah, the Daily News, New York Daily News, which is on the left side, just rolled out a splashy interview with him and focused on taking away the glory from guns and a lot of gun bashing stuff, which is particularly ironic from a guy who was a serial killer who killed people with a gun.
Right.
But, clearly the only people who should have guns are serial killers.
It reminds me of John McCain being the lead speaker on campaign finance reform when he was the one who had the worst violations of any Republican in the Senate.
Sure.
Now, there's also, in terms of the Republican Party, apparently you have a headline that says, Romney now more right-wing than Bush II, Reagan, and Nixon combined, which would be nice if it were believable for those of us who are on the far right, but tell us what's really going on.
Well, this is something the Democrats do. Every time they come out, every time there's a new Republican candidate, they scream that this is the most extremist Republican ever. John McCain, who was fairly on the liberal side, got the same ridiculous, insane treatment, the pretense that he was somehow more right-wing than Bush. Now the idea is that Bush and McCain were moderates, but Romney that Romney guy is a real extremist. So you have Obama getting up with Sandra Fluke and saying that Romney wants to take America back to the 1950s. He's going to do what no Republican before had ever done, and this is a guy who at one point came out for abortion.
I love, by the way, and Michael Savage has talked about this, the idea that the 50s were such a horrible time. Seems like a pretty good era in American history, I mean, segregation down south, whatever, but for the country as a whole, it's just kind of funny, as if the 50s were so bad.
The economics of it were pretty good. Most people would love to trade places with that. And nobody seriously believes that the Republicans are going to pull back anything socially. I mean, no Republican president has actually moved back anything socially. No Republican president has rolled rolled back any element of civil rights for anybody. So this is a load of garbage, and if liberals had half a brain, they would know it's a load of garbage.
Now, you have another section.
The only places the Republicans have pushed out anywhere is either on foreign policy or, in some cases, on domestic economic reforms and deregulation.
You have an interesting section in here called Moral Bankruptcy about the sad state of still the Olympic hosts, I guess, for a few more days or hours, Great Britain, about just the desperation that a lot of people are feeling over there. We're talking white native Britons, and yet foreign aid is a big priority over there, as of, obviously is harassment of Israel, but that doesn't necessarily cost as much. Can you explain that situation?
Well, actually, the harassment and the foreign aid overlap, especially when considered where some of that foreign aid goes to, but that's a separate topic. But obviously, in tough economic times, people are asking basic common sense questions, such as why are we spending billions and billions of dollars, much of it going to people who hate us, and obviously this is money that cannot be touched. In the UK now, Cameron has actually made some major cuts, but foreign aid is not being cut. I mean, the military is being cut to the bone. With foreign aid, money for Pakistan, that has to keep coming.
Of course. You also have a section, The Wit and Wisdom of the Foremother of Workplace Diversity Training, and you have a quote from a diversity training foremother named Jane Elliott, which says, "No white group has founded a major religion on this planet. The major religions were started in the Orient and the Middle East, not in Greece and Rome." I guess that's actually kind of true, especially if you don't consider Jews or Arabs white. But what's the greater point here?
Well, Jews are white,
yeah.
So obviously that part is ridiculous. And in case Christianity was for the most part started in Rome, which is Europe, so that part is even dumber.
Right.
But the idea is they present this kind of warped version of history, which is just as racist and supremacist as the things they claim to be fighting against.
It seems like
completely devoid of, it's completely not fact-based.
Yeah, it seems all a means to be getting power, almost like the Amnesty International leftists in Australia that we talked about before.
Yeah. And Elliot was particularly very, very creepy. When you have some time, just to look up videos on YouTube of her berating students, it really shows part of the true face of the left.
Oh, really? Sounds like the kind of person who treats wait staff horribly too. Let me read this, and then I want to ask you a question. You have a short section. I'm shocked there's gambling going on here. I think it's shocked. There's the actual quote from Casablanca, but that's another matter. And it's about let me just read it real quick for the readers. Romney spokeswoman Andrea Saul thrust herself into the spotlight today by making a super lame argument against Burton's outrageous "Romney killed my wife" ad by arguing that if the wife had been in Massachusetts, she would have had Romney care for insurance. This has enraged Ann Coulter, and she rips Saul to shreds, saying that Romney donors should demand Saul is fired or they won't give another dime. And you say this deserves a long eye roll, and that the argument isn't lame, it's actually a very good defense. The problem is that we have a candidate who is capable of making that defense. Now, some people are just going to see that quote, and they're going to be like, huh? How is it a good defense? So maybe you can explain what you mean a little bit there.
We have a liberal candidate who was responsible for state-based health care. So, from the angle that this is an attack on health care, it's an effective defense against it. It's not in compliance with the kind of idea that we want, that we would like to see health care being an individual matter. But the reality is this is the candidate we have. This is the candidate that Ann Coulter sold us on, and there's no point in pretending otherwise.
Now,
it's not the ideal situation, but this is where we are now. So
it's almost as if Ann Coulter is trying to get her conservative credentials back after talking about how great Romney was. I mean, it's just kind of surprising. But
it's just operating completely outside of reality. I mean, if we were running a candidate who had a tough position on gun control, then the reality is that in response to something like that, their spokesman would say, well, our candidate is on gun control. And it's a valid response. It's just completely out of whack with what we stand for. Romney Care is out of whack with what we stand for, but the reality is we have a Romney Care candidate. So, who's responsible for that? Ann Coulter at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you're not a huge fan of hers. I think you've made that clear before. Your section, Romney Remains Unpopular with Jews, talks about a personal experience. Maybe you can describe that a little bit when you were in Lakewood, New Jersey.
Well, no, it's not my personal experience.
Oh, okay.
Media accounts.
Oh, okay. I thought it was you were there.
Media accounts of Romney visiting Lakewood for a fundraiser and some of the media coverage of it.
Was it a fundraiser among Orthodox Jews, just out of curiosity, or another group within Lakewood?
It would have been mostly Orthodox Jews, though I don't believe exclusively.
Okay, you have a few other
Lakewood is not all Orthodox Jews.
Okay. You have no, I know, but it's largely a Hispanic population outside of the Orthodox Jewish community in Lakewood, or there is a community outside of
Lakewood does have some Latinos and blacks, but in this case I imagine the majority of the people inside were Orthodox Jews with probably some local white people, but I wasn't inside there. I don't know exactly the composition, but that would be why I would speculate.
I was just curious. Okay, you have a few other sections. Extremists offer to help fight extremism, and even Muslim extremists are moderate. It sounds like Islam being Islam. Same with this seems like good news. And then the final section, second to final section is interesting. Old soldiers and old wars. It was a really worthwhile history lesson. Maybe you could just share that. It's a Jew who was part of the Indian Army, basically saving what is now Bangladesh. Can you give a little summary so we can learn something here? Daniel?
Well, the general is actually an interesting figure since he essentially defeated Pakistan commanding the army in India. And there's a lot of material online. I do mention it from time to time because I think it's worth knowing, and it's one of the reasons the Muslims in Pakistan, of course, are even more obsessed over some Hindu-Jewish conspiracy. Incidentally, 4 Indian naval vessels were actually just in Israel for a day of ceremonies because the Indian military has something called Haifa Day, which they commemorate during World War I when Indian mounted lancers drove the Turkish military out of Haifa. It wasn't a major city back then.
I'm correct in understanding that Bangladesh was East Pakistan, and the war was between what was then West Pakistan, now is just Pakistan, and Bangladesh. It was largely a Muslim-on-Muslim war, right? And the Hindu-India intervened?
Well, it's sort of Muslim-on-Muslim. The Bangladesh side, they weren't Islamist per se, but the population was composed of Muslims on both sides. But the Pakistani side, Islam played more of a role than on the Bangladesh side.
Okay, interesting. And what's Jacob's first name again? I don't know if it's in the article as of now. If we want to look him up. Not important. Do you have it handy by chance? Daniel?
No.
Oh, yeah.
Jacob.
First name. Do you have his first name? If anyone wants to Google it.
They both seem to be Jacob.
Oh, Jacob. Okay. And I guess part of...
Jacob Farge, Raphael Jacob. So.
Gotcha. And I guess there is something of a Jewish military tradition in India. There has been a Jewish community there for a couple thousand years. Finally, you have
several, yeah.
It's you have a section called "In Public Pedagogy." Is it pedagogy or pedagogy today? I screwed up on the audio version, I think. And what's the key takeaway? Just the ridiculousness of some critical race theory courses. Anything else we should take out of that?
Ridiculous, but also very creepy because there's a lot of this stuff out there, and it's being used to prep and manipulate the teachers in order to control the educational system. And that includes berating teachers, compelling white teachers to see themselves as elementary racist, all that privilege stuff.
Yeah. Finally, Daniel, we've gone on a long time, but might as well get 30 seconds from you on this week's Torah reading, because this will get out there before it's Shabbos, and it's Parsha Re'eh. Any quick thoughts on that? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Well, obviously, Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't able to enter into Eretz Yisrael, but it's something that we can do. And it reminds us that the unfinished business of one generation becomes the task of the next generation. We're presented with the blessing and the curse. We're presented with an opportunity to make a good life for ourselves, or we're presented with an opportunity to destroy everything. And it's the same is true globally. The same is true nationally, where we were commanded to secure Israel, and instead of that, we allowed the Canaanites, and now we've allowed the Muslims to remain there and become the thorns and continue to drive us out.
Daniel
So
Greenfield.
again, the choice is between a blessing and a curse.
Daniel Greenfield, this column will be up probably around, I guess, 7, 8 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. You may hear this before the column is available. Thank you, as always, for your time, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.